Hi guys, welcome to the Leroy Studios. In this session, we're going to be looking at adding a reminder to a geofenced location. That's the point of entry. You could add a repeat reminder, so it could be in hours and it could be in minutes, and that will be triggered depending on the time in milliseconds that you set up to be reminded. And we're actually going to be adding this in the geofenced application. Before I continue, I would like you to show you how the whole application is going to look like. At first, you need to uh, give a permission. That's the access device location permission, which is very important. You access this at runtime because you're running Android 7.0 and above. For lower version, you add that to in the manifest. So after that, you have the two buttons to add the geofence and to remove, and the settings. You could add a repeat, um, pick the type of repetitions in minutes or in hours, and the interval you want, probably 20 minutes, 1 hour, which will be converted to milliseconds based on what you entered. You have that set up in the settings, giving a different pitch to that. You could add geofences. After that, you have that spit out the description entered, and the notification that you've just entered the particular geofence, even when you're exiting. So you have a reminder on this, which could be up to like 5 minutes or so, or 30 minutes as you want it, to be reminded that you are in a present location or you are out of a present location. So we are adding the reminder module to the geofence setup. I head straight to Android Studio. I have the setup in Android Studio where you have the build Gradle, which you will need to add the dependencies, the Google Play services, location, and for maps. That will be enough for this application. After that, you head straight to the layout files. We get to look at the layout files that were used. The main activity, which depicts the two buttons, the add and the remote geofences, and the recycler view, or probably a list view if you want it, to populate the list of added geofences. That's when it's been added and the times we exit, because this can actually be helpful if you are keeping data or you are keeping track of a particular entry and exit. It's going to actually let you know the time you entered and the exited, and at the same time you could add a reminder on it. So that's the juice we are putting on. Now you have that set up. The two buttons are below that. You have the list view to actually give the list of the details, and the item. Since you have a list view, you need an item attached to it, or since you are using a recycler view, you need an item attached to there as well, which you have right there, the title and the date, the title and date that you actually entered or exited a particular geofence. Now we have a separate activity for the settings activity. This is a standard way to set up a settings page where you actually use the shared preference on preference change. We'll get to talk about all that in this video. You have the fragment setup, which you'll be pointing at the settings activity and an inner fragment right there in the settings activity called the geofence preference fragment, and that's actually going to be populated by different implementation. We'll get to look at that later on. In the menu package, you have the main XML. The main XML is where you have your settings icon, that which you can see right there, the IC filter. So you have that right called from the drawable, which will actually show as an action if there is room. Cool. We'll be looking at the values. In the values, we have arrays.xml. What's this doing? This actually depicting the two form of settings we're looking at. The repetition type. What type of repetition type are you pointing at? Is it in hours or in minutes? So that's just the label and its value. So are you going to actually choose minutes or hours? So you're actually going to pick one of the two. You might also go further to actually point at hours, weeks, days, and so on. But for the focus of this tutorial, we're going to stick to hours and minutes. Cool. We'll get to look at the XML folder, which will be attached to the settings activity. We call that settings main. So what we're going to have there, this is where you get to know what you're going to display on the settings layout. Now we're going to be having the switch preference to actually get the state of the repeat. You once you toggle on, that means you want the repeat to be triggered. Once it's off, all repeat gets cancelled. So that's just what that is. And another one is the edit text preference. This gives you the ability, or the interface, to key in the numbers, or the numbers of days, the numbers of hours you want to repeat, the numbers of weeks, the numbers of minutes that you really want to make this repetition triggered. And we have a list preference, which we only list two. That's in hours and in minutes. You could go further to add other aspects. So it's actually going to come out in the list. So you have to pick any one of these to get this settings triggered. So that's just it. We've used the switch preference, the edit text, and the list preference. And you'll get to look at how we're going to deliver that right there in the settings activity class. From here, I'll be headed straight to the Java classes, and we should understand what we're expecting. We'll be looking at the data package, where we're going to have the content provider and the contract, and also the DB upper, because we're actually going to be saving each of the callback we are having, which is going to come in the notification. We'll be saving that to the SQLite database so that we could see when the user entered present, because that might have been cancelled when you get the notification, and you're going to actually see when the user exited from a Geofence. Cool. And we have the reminder, which we'll be using the reminder alarm manager, the scheduler, and the reminder alarm service. So that's cool. I'm actually going to be starting from the Geofence contract. Right now, we should know how to set up a contract, the content authority, the columns needed, and so on, and also the name of the table. In the DB upper, you get to create your first table, which is the Geofence table over here, and you have it created by the columns. You'll be needing the ID, title, date, and time. Those are the columns that you'll be specifying the IDs in, not auto-increment, which is the primary key. Cool. After that, you have your provider to actually create, read, update, and delete. We'll be using the Geofence, and for a particular Geofence, create the URI matcher to get that set up. In the Uncreate method, you instantiate your DB helper, have an object working. You have the query method to query the DB, which you could either be all the data from the Geofence, or for a particular Geofence with an ID. Cool. In the get type, you need to have the type you're using, the Geofence and Geofence with an ID, and also the insert. You're trying to insert into the DB. You insert in the reminder, which you have here. You call the database insert based on the table name and the values that you're inserting, and you return a get content resolver and notify change. Cool. The same thing goes for delete, which you can implement, and the update. I have all of that implemented for you. You can also use them. I only use the query, the insert. You could get to delete. If I would swipe, you delete values from the list view. Cool. Let's get to look at the main activity. The main activity here is going to be simple. It extends app compact as usual, implements the incomplete listener, and also the loader manager callbacks with the cursor to actually fetching from the background to populate the list view. Access to the geofencing API with the geofencing client, the list of geofences to be used, an array list of geofence, the pending intent, which is going to request to add or remove geofences. We have the process of adding or remove geofences with the buttons, add, remove, and the geofence list view, which will actually be underneath the button, an adapter to bind data to the list view. That's it. And the loader, we have it right there. Now let's get to look at the Uncreate method. You get the UI widget, you initialize all views, and you set the adapter of the cursor adapter got in here to the list view. Cool. That's how to really get your list view ready. And you empty the list for storing geofences over here. You set the pending intent using added geofence and remove geofence to null initially. You get the geofences used. That's the data is hard coded already. This could actually be done dynamically, probably if you are fetching from the APIs or somewhere, or you're actually getting a list of geofence to be added. That's the name, the lat and long. That's basically what you're going to be adding as a geofence location. So we have that hard coded already. We'll get to look at the class that houses that. The client initializing the location services, get the geofence client, and trigger the init loader for the loader manager. Cool. In the start method, you check for permissions or you restart the loader. Now you need to build and return the geofence request, which you have to set the initial trigger, and which is the enter, and add geofences to be monitored by geofencing service. And you build up the builder, which you've actually started with over here. And you have the geofences button handler to also get the alert to be notified when the device enters or exits. Now we're going to be checking for the location permission granted, which is the add geofences, to show snackback if there's insufficient permission. If there's not, because if you didn't actually accept the location permission, it's not going to be able to detect your location. So that's very, very important. Now let's get to look at the remove geofences button handling. This removes all geofences, which stops further notification when the device enters or exits previously registered geofences. You have that set up. You trigger the remove geofences method, and this is also what it takes. And at the point of removing geofences, you also cancel all alarm. Don't forget, by instantiating the alarm scheduler, and you cancel the alarm, the context, the time of removing all geofences from the geofencing client. So that's actually going to wipe that and clear that out. This runs as a result of which is the Uncomplete method, as a result of calling the add geofences and removing the geofences if it's available. So on complete, once having a successful message, it's going to actually let us know, have you removed your fence or have you added a new geofence. So that's what that's going to do. And at the same time, the error message will be passed if it's not done successfully. If this is not true, the task is not successful, it's actually going to let us know. And we have the get geofencing pending intent. This gets the pending there to send with a request to add or remove the geofences. Location services issues the intent inside the pending intent. You have that set up, and you have the hard-coded list, which this is where you get the data to populate geofence list. And you're going to be using a for each loop, which is going to be for each entry, that's for each key and value, using the map entry, which you have here, the entry and the corresponding value. And that's where you get to add to the geofence list based on the request ID. You set the circular region to the latitude and longitude you're getting, and based on the radius, actually setting up with that location, and you set the expiration duration in milliseconds, and the transition types, enter and exit. So you build up the geofence with a list. There's going to be a list of geofence. So you could have more, over 100, up to 100. I think based on 100 documentation, you could add up to 100 locations in your geofence, but I don't think you could exceed 100. So that's just how it flows. You set the button enabled state. This ensures that only one button is enabled at a time for the geofence. So if you click on add geofence, the remove geofences should be the add geofence should be gray, while the remove geofences should be active. Once you click on remove geofences, the add geofence should get active, while the remove geofences should be inactive. So that's just what these snippets is going to do. It's going to set the button enable state to each of the button we have. The snack bar to keep on showing messages, updates the geofences added. We have some pending geofence tasks, which will actually take cognizance of the pending until the location permission was granted, and also for the permission, the check permission on request permission, which actually going to handle the permission which you've been granted. And the Uncreate loader, this is going to actually fetch all values, all added values, or all exited values. Once you are adding into a geofence, it picks that up, set that up to the loader. The loader is going to fetch that from the SQLite database, and you get that display. So we are actually the custom loader. We are getting the columns, 3 columns, title, date, and the ID of the particular geofence based on its content URI, and you're fetching the cursor, and you're swapping the cursor over there to the cursor adapter. So you're going to bind to the view So that's cool. We have all that set up, and that's just the major focus of the application. And before I proceed, we get to look at our settings. We trying to manipulate things here. We're trying to make the settings quite looking very okay. Settings a separate activity of settings which is functional, and this is just the way to do it. You have a settings activity, and as I've said earlier, an inner fragment inside the activity that extends the preference fragment, and this is where you get to do all the manipulation. In the Uncreate method, you have the layout, the settings main XML. That's from the XML folder, not from the layout folder. Now I have the UI. We have the UI where we have the switch, the edit, and the list preference. Cool. Firstly, we have to bind preference summary to value based irrespective of any of the preference you're using. You need to still bind it to the value. The only aspect you need to take cognizance is to check an instance of a preference for you to know what to do. So we're going to be doing that right there in onPreference change and in onBind preference summary to the value. Firstly, let's look at the bind preference summary to the value. This takes a preference object, any of it, either a switch, either a list, or an edit text. Now, for you to be able to sure to know what kind of preference is coming into the bind preference summary to value, you test if the preference is an instance of a list preference or an instance of an edit text preference. They are kind of work hand in hand. That's why they're actually categorized together. So you categorize the switch preference with the checkbox as well. So they kind of extract values in the same format. So what you're going to do, you call the shared preference. You want to save values to the preference. This is where you now get the string with a key, and you pass in the value saved right there into the preference string over here. At that point in time, you will still need to trigger the onPreference change. That is, if the user go back to change the value of that particular preference, so it's going to be recorded. It's not going to lose count of the changes. So that's the essence of this method, onPreference change, which we'll be looking after explaining this. The second argument is if the preference is an instance of a switch preference or a checkbox. Since all these four will cover all what we're doing. Now what you're going to do, you get the default shared preference that you've gotten. Now it's because you need to get the boolean now, because the state is either true or false. Is either you check a checkbox or you leave it unchecked. Is either you toggle a switch box or you leave it untoggled. That's why you need to have a get boolean. So that's why the difference. This get string, this get boolean. At the point in time, you need to call onPreference change. If there's a change, probably it has been toggled or it has been deactivated. Cool. Now let's get to look at onPreference change. OnPreference change, you pass in the preference and the object, which is the value that you're looking at. Let's get to look at the way we're going to decompile this. If the preference is an instance of list preference, you call the list preference, you find the index of the value, which is the string value, which is also the value from the object. You convert that object value to string now, and you get to test if the index now, because it's going to actually come in a list. You get that? That's why you need to test. If an index is greater than or equals to 0, you need a correct sequence of labels to get the entries of each of those index. So it's going to start from an index 0, 1, 2, 3, just until it gets to the end of this argument, which is the preference index. So if it's 4 there, this is actually going to get to above 4 once it starts to count down. And you set the summary to the label based on its index. Probably first index 0, 1, 2, as you have it. Now for the switch preference and the checkbox, you need to call the boolean, since once you get them value, the value cannot be string because the value you're expecting is going to be in boolean. So you cast that to the value object, and that's going to convert that to boolean, and you pass that to the repeat state boolean variable. So you have that set up. With that, you could set the default value of that preference to the boolean state. either true or false. So if it's true, it's checked. If it's false, unchecked. If it's true, it's toggled. If it's untoggled, false. That's the default value, this setting right there. And if any other instances are not part of what you've set up here, just set the summary, so the string value you have, so convert it to string. You have it set up. So on preference change is going to trigger, it's going to work smoothly. And I'll show you how you're going to call this from the calling activity that you're going to need it from. So we've covered the main activity, the settings activity, and we have a constant which we still need to shed a little bit light on. That's where we add code the location values of our landmarks. We have the first landmark called Surulere, the second is the Sherry, and the latitude and longitude. So you could actually make this aspect dynamic in the sense that you could use a place picker to get those location, or you could actually be fetching the location from the API or from a cloud source or from somewhere which is not embedded right there in the application. So this is where the trick actually gets much more extendable. With that, you could set up the radius and parameters. This is a constant which you could actually change if you want to, and the expiration which is going to expire after 12 hours of a day, which is like half of a day of the geolocation, and you have that specified as well. Now the adapter is just binding the what you get since you're swapping the values you have, and you're using a list view. And maybe you're using a recycle view. You're going to have a swap cursor as a method to deal with. But now you're going to just make this simple. You have the bind view. For the bind view, you have a cursor already, and you don't worry about moving to the first or getting the position. It's actually going to get that set up for you, and before you know it, you bind data to its appropriate columns. What you've done right there. Now the last aspect, which is very, very important, which ushers us down to the reminder, is the Geofence transition intent service. This takes cognizance of the entry and exit into a particular geofence, and that's where the notification gets triggered. So we're actually going to be replacing notification with the reminder. That's just it. Extend the intent service. Cool. Now we need to get some calculation done. Let's know the milliseconds of a minute, the milliseconds of an hour, of day, week, and month. So you could be able to do some application based on the day. Going to be in long data type, and you have that specified as well. And the undo intent. Cool. What you're going to do, you get the transition type. You test that the reported transition was of interest. Is that enter or exit? Any one of it, you need to get the list of geofences that were triggered, because it might be more than one. You might be triggering up to 2 geofence location, very closely knitted together, and that's just what that's going to do here. Over here, you have a list, and you set the transition details as a string, where you call the get transition details to actually pass in the transition, and you also pass in the triggering geofences. And that's just what it's going to do. It's going to get the list of the ID of that geofence, which is get the request ID, and that's how it's going to add that to the array list called the triggering geofencing IDs list. So cool. We return that back to the calling method. So this is actually going to return a value, this, and that's where you could pass that into a string called geofence transition details. Now you have almost everything set up for you. The only thing left for you now is the alarm. Now we're going to go to start up with the alarm. I'm going to leave this aspect, or I could easily brush that out as well. So this is the point whereby you're going to add to the SQLite database. You have the content values. Now you're returning the key title, which is going to be the geofence transition details. That's the title, and the date is going to be the formatted date. That's the particular date, the present, when this is being triggered, either entry or exit, any one of it. So the dates will be different. The entry will be different from the time the exit is going to be triggered, so that date is going to be different. And you call the get content resolver to insert that into this database with the content URL where the value is going to insert that correctly. Let's get to look at how we're going to trigger the alarm. We're going to trigger the alarm based on some reasons. Number one, are we setting up a repeat to these notification. Number 2, are we not? Number 3, we still need an exact location triggered. That's when you enter or exit, even if you don't have an alarm. And we're still going to know how many minutes, how many hours. How are we going to calculate that? How are we going to set that up with the alarm manager in milliseconds to understand what we are driving at? So let's get to look at that. The first aspect is called the shared preferences. You get the default shared preference. You have an object called the shared prefs. This is what you're going to use to interfere with the different key value pairs in the shared preference. The first is the repetition interval, which is a string, and we have the key at the settings rep interval key, while the value we have it also as a string, but we've actually binded values to that using the settings activity as we've been coming. So if you should notice, this is just mere 0 because at first, at default, the interval is 0. So you have that set up. We move further to the type. What type? Is it in hours or in minutes? That's what we are expecting. The key is repetition type, while the value is going to be the default, which is going to be hours. The default is hours, so you could change to minutes. The reason why it's hours because of reminder could come very often when you're repeating, and that could actually drain the battery performance. So we set it up to hours. So if you should put 5 hours, that's a very long time as well. Now the boolean here, the only difference here is the boolean, which is the switch. Is either true or false. Now we need to parse the boolean from the string we used to have to a boolean, because that's just the only way we could put values correctly into a shared preference, a string. Even if it's an integer, if it's long, you just parse that, you transform that to string, and for that you set it up and convert that to its appropriate data type. And now let's get to look at the repetition type. If it's equals to minutes, now we should be very sure. We're going to do some multiplication here. We return the interval, we pass it back to integer, and multiply by the milliseconds and minutes as I've set up earlier over here. So that's going to be in milliseconds. So your repeat time will be in milliseconds if you've actually chose minutes. And if it's hours, you do the same multiplication based on the milliseconds and hours, and you have the repeat time. That's if the repeat type chosen is the hours or minutes. Cool. Now we'll move further. If the repeat state is true, that's when you could set a repeat alarm. If it's not true, you set an exact alarm, just one-off alarm. But if it's true, you set a repeat alarm and pass in the parameter, the repeat time over here. If it's not true, you don't need a repeat time, you just pass in the context, the current time in milliseconds, and the transition details. I hope we understand that. After that, let's get to look at our reminder, where we have the provider, the alarm provider. This is just a boilerplate which can be replicated in different aspects you need. Where you have your inject alarm manager, you get the alarm manager. And where I really want you to put focus on is the scheduler. In the alarm scheduler, that's where you have the methods that were triggered right there from the Geofence transition. The set alarm, just set the alarm. What are you taking into consideration? The context, the alarm type, the Geofence. Cool. But now we need to convert the Geofence to URI. That will be very easy for us to pass into the pending intent and push down to the alarm service to handle the notification for us. So you parse the string to a URI and you get that done. So you set exact alarm, or you set based on the different SDK that you have. If the SDK is greater than 23, you could set that and allow while idle with the wake lock. And if it's greater than 19, you set exact. If not, just set it. So any of these will trigger based on the kind of mobile device or the kind of Android version that you're running. You set the repeat. The same thing happens. You have the repeat time here. The Geofence title, you convert that to parse that to URI, the time and the context. So we have the cancelled alarm as well here to actually get that cancelled for us. Cool. Now we'll be looking at the reminder alarm service. This service is where the notification is going to be triggered, and the service extends the intent service, expecting an intent, a pending intent from the scheduler, which you have right there. And the pending intent here from the class set the data, that's the URI here, which is returned. You set the data to the URI, and you return the pending get service. You pass the action, and that's another intent. Trigger that, and you have the constructor of the alarm service undo that same intent because you are flagging the update current. It's going to actually catch for the intent. What it's going to do here, you're going to call the notification manager. You have the URI, you get the data from the intent. Now you're going to convert that URI to string, since it's the string value we needed. So that's what you have here. URI to string, turn the URI to a string, and display the notification to the view, which is the main activity. And you pass the operation, which they add the next intent with parent stack. You get pending intent, and the major focus here is the script, which is the URI that was converted to string, and that is going to be the content text, which is going to be entered which place. You have that set up. You have the drawable, cool, and which is actually going to be the logo of your notification, and the vibrate. Add a vibration to that, so it's going to vibrate anytime you're going to have a notification or a repeat notification of a particular state of geofence entry or exit. Cool. And sound, you could also add a sound, which is going to be the default sound of your notification. It's going to actually trigger that with it. So that's how also to set vibration and sound to your notification. You set auto cancel to true, and you build up the notification. With this, you are going to have a smooth running application that keeps repeating with the time you've specified. Once you cancel out the repetition, and you cancel out the repetition, and you're still going to have your geofence triggered anytime it enters or exits a geofence latitude and longitude. Cool. With this, we've wrapped up and we've concluded a whole lot when it comes to geofence and reminder. My good listeners, I'll be talking about how to create multiple accounts and have them how to connect or continue to know the location where the user is, just like something you have in Uber. I'll come up with this as time goes by. This is something we really need to test out so that it's going to actually be useful for you guys, and it's for your learning and also for your delight. So I will actually be looking at the manifest. The only thing you need to add in the manifest, the provider, as you know, and the service, which is the reminder alarm service that was used, and the transition intent service that was also used. We also need to add the activity, the settings activity that was called to actually help us with our settings. And you need to add some permission, the access file location, the receive boot completed, the internet, and the access network state. Permissions, these are very, very important. With that, you're good to go. Compile your application, test it out in a real device or in an emulator if you like. So you're going to actually have the same result. So at this point in time, I will say thank you very much for hanging out with me throughout this video. I'll implore you to stay by. Check out the source code in the GitHub link sharing in the description. And please, please, please don't forget to please click on the button to subscribe to my channel and keep up your notification open so you could get up-to-date information of what is happening right there in the channel. Thank you very much and have a blessed time.